My name is Silverlock, and today I'll be taking on a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokémon Sword using only Fire-type Pokémon. Despite being one of the 3 starter choices in nearly every mainline game, Fire types have been relatively uncommon compared to Grass and Water types. Some of the earlier games in the series were somewhat stingy with providing the player usable Fire types, but fortunately, the more recent generations have been much more generous. And that's especially true in Pokémon Sword and Shield. Between the new Fire-type Pokémon found on regular routes and the ones that appear in the wild area during intense sun, we're given a surprisingly plentiful selection to work with. So for this playthrough, along with the typical Nuzlocke rules, I'll be limited to just one Fire-type per area of the game to take on the Gyms of Galar, and earn a spot in the Champion Cup, and eventually take on the Champion. We start things off by, of course, choosing the Fire-type starter Scorbunny. I name him Apollo, and since we don't get any encounters until the wild area, it's up to him to take on the first few routes completely on his own. This includes the battle against Hop that ends up being a 3-on-1, but this little guy has absolutely no issue taking him on solo. Once we do make it to the wild area, I head straight to East Lake Axwell, where I can grab our next encounter, a Vulpix I name Amaterasu. And after we sign up for the gym challenge, we can move on to Route 3, where our next possible encounter, Sizzlipede, has just a 1% chance of randomly appearing. I expected this to take a decent chunk of time, but somehow it ends up as my very first encounter. So thanks to some luck, Hestia the Sizzlipede joins the team at the earliest opportunity, which saves us from having to wait for the guaranteed one later on. Next in the Galar mine I catch a roly-coly I name Vulcan, and after Hestia takes her turn soloing the first fight against Speed, Apollo can evolve into Raboot, while Vulcan quickly evolves into Carkol, gaining the required fire typing to officially join the team. I then catch Agni the Eevee on Route 4, who will eventually become a Flareon, and now we're finally ready to take on the first gym battle against Milo and his grass types, which goes about as well as you'd expect. I start with Hestia versus his Gossifleur, and her quad-resistant Firebug typing forces Milo to use Round after Hestia connects with a strong Flame Wheel. A second Flame Wheel takes it out the next turn, and then we're left with Milo's Dynamax to Eldegoss. I Dynamax Hestia in response, but a Max Strike still does some solid damage while lowering her speed. And a Max Flare just barely doesn't do half, so I use Max Guard on the second turn, then switch to Vulcan to tank its last Max Strike, although it does get a critical hit. But as soon as Eldegoss reverts, it stops being much of a threat. A couple flame charges later, and Eldegoss goes down, winning us our first, and possibly easiest gym battle for this run. But our next gym battle against Nessa will be our first of a few logistical nightmares. 2 of her water types can be dealt with without too much trouble, but her Ace Dreadnought will be our first major threat of the run, as no one on the team so far can deal with it directly. So to give ourselves more of a fighting chance, I head over to the Isle of Armor DLC to pick up a couple more encounters. First in the Fields of Honor, I find a Fletchinder I name Ra, then in the warm-up tunnel I find a Torkoal who I name Hephaestus. His gentle nature is a mixed bag, trading some of his amazing defense for some extra special defense, but the real prize is his Drought ability. This will give him and the entire team some extra firepower, along with weakening water-type attacks, which is obviously a godsend for this run. And while I'm in the area, I make a stop at the Pot Bottom Desert, where I can find a Firestone to evolve Amy into Ninetales. With these new additions to the team and a bit of prep work, I'm hoping this will be enough to make it through our first major test of the run. Ra struts off strong with an itemless acrobatics, and it doesn't quite knock out Nessa's Goldeen, but luckily it just goes for an agility. Things could get scary, but a priority quick attack the next turn overrides the speed boost to take Goldeen out. Aerocuda is next, whose Aqua Jet does some decent damage, but another acrobatics is strong enough to take it down in a single hit. That just leaves us with Nessa's Dynamax Dreadnought. I went ahead and taught Ra Endure just so he can survive the first Dynamax turn, and then I pivot to Hephaestus. Drought activates, setting up the sun, cutting the damage of Dreadnought's next Max Geyser down to just over half. I then Dynamax Hephaestus and use Max Guard to block its last Dynamax turn. The worst part is over, but we still haven't done any damage. With the rain up, a Razor Shell brings Hephaestus down to just 16 HP, before I go for a Max Flare that obviously doesn't do too much damage, but does bring back the sun. I then switch to Amy, and another Razor Shell deals a bit over a third. She's holding an Absorb Bulb, which raises her special attack, but an extra Sensory the next turn doesn't even bring it to half. Another Razor Shell brings her to just 12 HP, and at this point, I realize that there's no one else on my team that could take a hit, even with the sun. So I make the tough decision to bring Ra back in as a sacrifice, which will allow someone else to come in safely. I choose Apollo, and thanks to the team's earlier efforts, he can survive one last Laser Shell in the final turn of the sun, and land a couple double kicks to finally bring Dreadnought down, earning us our second badge. This fight was always going to be a tall ask for the limited fire types that are available at this point of the game, so even though we lost Raw, I'm somewhat satisfied with how it turned out. After treating a homeless man to dinner, and breezing through a couple easy fights against Speed and Marnie, we make our way back to Motostoke to take on our fellow fire-type specialist, Kabu. And since I was lucky enough to catch a Sizzlepede earlier, I can use the gym challenge to get a different guaranteed encounter instead, a Litwick I named Hyperion. With him, we're back to having a full team, but it'll be a while before he's actually battle-ready. I lead with Vulcan against Kabu's Ninetales, having him set up Stealth Rocks after taking nearly nothing from a Fire Spin. Then I also have him holding a Rocky Helmet, so after a couple Ancient Powers brings Ninetales into the red, a quick attack-induced chip damage ends up finishing her off. Arcanine is next, first taking Stealth Rock damage coming in. A Bite drops Vulcan below half, but another Ancient Power plus Rocky Helmet chip puts Arcanine into the red pretty quickly. Knowing Vulcan could take one more hit, I keep him in to take another bite, which naturally triggers his Rocky Helmet again, and causes Arcanine to knock itself out as well. With that, Vulcan finds time to set up a Reflect before Centiskorch comes in, who immediately loses half of its HP from the Stealth Rocks, putting us in a perfect position. I switch to Hephaestus, who shrugs off a Max Slutterby and Max Centinferno like they're nothing, and after Dynamaxing himself, he just needs a couple Max Strikes to take Centiskorch down, winning us our third badge, and usurping Kabu as the true Fire-type specialist. With the second half of the wild area now available, we can finally get a slew of new encounters and evolutions. First, Hestia evolves into Centiskorch, then I find a Firestone to evolve Agni into Flareon, though at this point I unfortunately come to the conclusion that he just doesn't have a spot on the team. Instead, I make a stop by the Digging Duo, who end up digging me up another Firestone, which I use immediately on Helios the Growlithe, who I picked up in the Hammerlock Hills. Then I make a return trip to the Isle of Armor to find a wandering Salazzle on Challenge Road, who I name Konohana. I then take some time to find 50 Alolan Diglett, which rewards me with an Alolan Marowak. Unfortunately, Kojin comes with a nearly useless Calm Nature that lowers his attack, but that's nothing a serious Mint in a Thick Club can't fix. Back in Galar, I go ahead and grab Fornax the Heatmore while on Route 6, and after another uneventful fight against Hop, Vulcan evolves into Colossal, and Apollo into Cinderace. With all that, we finally have a fully evolved team just in time to take on B and her fighting types, but in the end, we actually only need one. I lead with Konohana using Nasty Plot to increase her special attack, while her Hitmontop goes for revenge. Her defense lowering nature means it does some decent damage even when resisted, but a disable the next turn shuts it down, giving her some breathing room to go for another Nasty Plot, bringing her to +4 special attack. With that, and after dodging a triple kick, Konohana proceeds to completely sweep B's team all on her own, including her Gigantamax Machamp. In a blink of an eye, that's badge number 4. And after Hestia once again demolishes Bede solo, it's just a jump, skip, and hop to Balonlay for the next gym fight against Opal and her fairy types. Amy starts off with a couple extra sentries to take down her Galarian Weezing, though not before taking a critical hit Sludge. Togekiss is next, and a Flamethrower does about a third, but then I'm reminded that Togekiss knows Ancient Power, and with the risk of an Omni Boost, this thing could quickly become a menace. So I switch to Vulcan, who can tank it fairly well, and after getting a defense boost from correctly guessing Opal's favorite color, we're nearly back on track, until her next Ancient Power ends up getting the Omni Boost. Vulcan can fire back with his own Ancient Power, but even 2 of them still isn't enough to take her down on his own. So I pivot to Helios, who just needs to tank one more Ancient Power, and he does, allowing him to finally take it down with an extreme speed on the very next turn. Mawile comes out next and lowers his attack with Intimidate, but Opal is gracious enough to give us another quiz that boosts him back up to +1, meaning a dig on the following turn is more than enough to take Mawile out. Last is Opal's Gigantamax Alchemy, but since its only damaging move is Fairy-type, my entire team is literally in no danger of taking any meaningful damage. So I bring in Konohana, who I don't even bother Dynamaxing. A G-Max Finale does almost nothing, so after a few Sludge Bombs, Alchemy goes down, earning us our 5th badge. Afterwards, we're transported back to Hammerlock, and after witnessing a kidnapping in broad daylight, Hyperion can finally evolve into Lampet at level 41. And with a Duskstone in hand, I can immediately fully evolve him into Chandelure, whose absurd special attack stat will be invaluable moving forward. But now we're up against Gordy and his Rock types, our second major type disadvantage of the run, so this fight will require a bold strategy. I have Helios lead against his Barbaracle, dropping its attack with Intimidate, before firing off a super effective close combat to bring it down to about a 4th. I expected it to start with a Shell Smash, but on the off chance it decides to go for Razor Shell right away, I had Helios hold a White Herb to negate the defense and special defense drop. It does end up using Shell Smash, and an extreme speed the next turn is enough to take it out. Next up is Shuckle, so I decide to bring in Hyperion for his battle debut. Of course, Shuckle is incapable of dealing any significant damage, even with super effective Rock Tombs. A couple Heat Waves later, and Shuckle goes down without a fuss. Then comes Stonejourner. I switch to Kojin as he sets up Stealth Rocks, then, just as expected, it sets up a Wonder Room the next turn, swapping both of our defense and special defense. For context, Stonejourner's special defense is 20, and Kojin is holding a Thick Club. With that, we're now down to Gordy's Gigantamax Colossal, and after Dynamaxing, a single Max Quake from Kojin is all it takes to bring it down, giving us a surprisingly easy win, despite my team's type disadvantage. With our 6th badge in hand, we finally unlock the Water Bike upgrade that gives us access to a bunch of useful items and TMs, and we also get access to certain parts of the wild area, like the Lake of Outrage where we can find one of our next encounters. But the level cap hasn't quite caught up with us. So instead, we'll just keep moving forward to Spikemouth to take on the next gym battle against Piers. His Scrafty starts off with a Fake Out against Hephaestus, but his held leftovers basically undoes it. After tanking a Brick Break on the next turn, a Sun-boosted Weather Ball drops Scrafty to about a third. It tries to lower his accuracy with a Sand Attack, but Hephaestus fights through and lands a second Weather Ball to take it down. Next is Malamar, but Hephaestus has no issues tanking more hits, and just a couple more Weather Balls easily takes it down as well. The Sun ends as Obstagoon comes out next, and after we both waste our turns protecting/obstructing, a Throat Chop brings Hephaestus down to about a fourth, while an Earth Power barely scratches back in return. I decide to switch to Hestia on another Obstruct, then have her set up with Coil on the next turn. A couple Throat Chops take her down below half, but a boosted Leech Life nearly takes Obstagoon out at a single hit. With the heal, I decide it's safe to go for another Coil on the next turn to set up further, but then it ends up obstructing the next Leech Life. This harshly lowers her defense, allowing the next Throat Chop to bring Hestia down below half, before a final Leech Life finally takes it down. Last is Skuntank, and thanks to that defense drop, I have to switch Hestia out now. I bring in Apollo, who just barely doesn't kill with a Pyro Ball. Skuntank then uses Screech, and fearing a strong priority Sucker Punch, I go ahead and pivot again to Helios. And sure enough, Skuntank tries to go for Sucker Punch, so on the next turn, a higher priority Extreme Speed takes it down, giving us our 7th badge. And with that, we're finally down to the 8th and final gym battle against Raihan. This fight is always a major challenge compared to the rest of the game, mostly due to it being a double battle. His Sandstorm strategy, and the fact that his entire team can hit mine super effectively, definitely adds to the complexity, so for this, I'm going to need a very smart and very bold strategy to get through. The first order of business is overriding his Gigalith's Sandstream ability with Hephaestus' Drought. To make that happen, Gigalith actually needs to go first, because the order in which weather-setting abilities activate is based on who outspeeds. But since Gigalith's base speed is just 5 points higher than a Torkoal's, I went ahead and gave Hephaestus some Greppa Berries I happen to have on hand in order to lower any speed EVs he happened to pick up throughout the run. And this adjustment works perfectly, giving us an immediate advantage. But that's just the start. I taught both him and Hyperion Solar Beam from the TM I found in Turffield, and with the sun in place, it lets them fire it off in a single turn. I also had Hyperion hold the Choice Scarf, allowing him to go first and take out Gigalith in a single hit, while Hyperion holds the Choice Specs, letting his Solar Beam deal over half to Flygon. Sandaconda then replaces Gigalith, and I fire off 2 more instant Solar Beams. Hyperion takes out Flygon, and Hephaestus takes out Sandaconda, though not before it paralyzes Hyperion with a Glare. But that's okay, because now we've set up a perfect 2-on-1 against Raihan's Gigantamax Duraludon. Sandaconda's Sandspit ability does end up bringing back the Sandstorm, but at this point it will not matter. I switch Helios in for Hyperion, lowering Duraludon's attack with Intimidate. Then I Dynamax Hephaestus and go for a Max Guard on the first turn to block a Max Rockfall. I expect Helios to be the target of Duraludon's attacks, so I have him use Dig, which proves to be the correct choice as he avoids another Max Rockfall. Hephaestus then fires off a Max Quake that brings Duraludon down to a 4th, and on the next turn, Helios comes back up to finish it off. To say that went well is a bit of an understatement, I think. And with our final gym badge acquired, it's finally time for the Endgame Champion Cup. But before that, we have a couple final encounters that I've been patiently waiting for. First, I return to the Lake of Outrage during Intense Sun, at a more appropriate level, where there's a 2% chance of finding a Turtonator. It takes a while, but she finally shows her weird-looking face, and we can add Pele the Turtonator to the team. Her careful nature causes her great special attack stat to take a hit, but a fire type that isn't weak to water thanks to her part dragon typing is a big deal to have for this run. Then next on an island in the Workout Sea, I can find our final encounter of the run, a Heat Rotom who I named Surtur. His Levitate ability is another godsend, giving us an immunity to common ground type attacks. There is technically another viable encounter in Larvesta, who would eventually become a powerful Volcarona, but I decided to skip it for this playthrough. In my previous bug-only video, a Quiver Dance Volcarona nearly single-handedly won me the final fight, so to give myself a little extra challenge, I'll be excluding it this time around. And back in Galar, we start the tournament with the fight against Marnie. Her Liepard opens with a critical hit Snarl, but a Leech Life from Hestia takes out in a single hit and heals her back to full health. Scrafty is next, and another Leech Life just barely doesn't hit half, but then it just misses a Swagger. I go for a Coil the next turn to start setting up, but then a second Swagger does connect, and confuses. I decide to go for another Leech Life, and luckily it connects, knocking Scrafty out. Next up is Toxicroak, and I keep Hestia in, but this time she hits herself in confusion, and is brought to nearly half HP after a Venoshock. I swap over to Hephaestus, who sets up the Sun, as Toxicroak goes for a Toxic. But because of its Dry Skin ability, it ends up taking a bit of damage while the Sun is out. And after Hephaestus survives a boosted Venoshock, an Earth Power leaves it just barely hanging on. Either way, Hephaestus needs to come out, so I switch to Helios to take another Venoshock, while Toxicroak withers away in the sunlight. Morpeko goes down to a single dig, and just like that, we're down to Marnie's Gigantamax Grimmsnarl. I decide to switch to Vulcan, as he tanks a Max G-Snooze coming in, then on the next turn I have him set up a Reflect after tanking another one. He falls asleep, and then I switch to Apollo, and after Grimmsnarl reverts to normal size, a single Pyro Ball is enough to get the one-hit KO, winning us our first match. Next up is Hop, and Helios starts off strong by taking out his double with a single close combat. For Snorlax, I switch to Surtur, who can dodge a high horsepower thanks to Levitate, and after a decently strong Thunderbolt, Snorlax switches to using Hammer Arm, which lets me pivot into Kojin, who can completely shut it down with his fighting type immunity, and take it out the next turn with a Brick Break. Pincurchin falls to a single Earthquake, then a Flame Wheel takes Corviknight down to about a fourth. I then bring Surtur back in to resist a Drill Peck, before taking it down with a Thunderbolt. Last is Hop's Dynamax Rillaboom, so I switch to Helios to Intimidate, reducing the power of a Max Darkness. I go ahead and Dynamax in return, then have Helios let loose a Max Flare that just barely doesn't get the one-shot. But after a super effective Max Quake, Hop tries using a full restore, but thanks to the previous Max Flare setting up the Sun, the next one is more than enough to take it down in a single hit, winning our second tournament match with relative ease. We've locked in our 2 victories, but now Oleana locks in on her weird obsession with her boss, and decides to make it our problem. Her Frostlass starts off by trying to set up with Double Team, but Helios manages to connect with a Flare Blitz to take her down in one hit. He heals some of the recoil with a Hell Shell Bell, as Milotic comes out next. She would normally be our team's biggest threat by virtue of being a water type, but I happen to teach Helios Wild Charge beforehand, with 2 of them being enough to take her down. Salazzle is next, and connects with a Poison Gas, as I go for a Dig, which scores us another one-hit KO on the next turn. I then switch to Hephaestus to take on Sarina, and after protecting the Get Some Leftovers recovery, he gets it with an Attract. But Hephaestus has no room for romance now, as he just pushes through to land a Weather Ball for another one-shot. Last is her Gigantamax Garbodor, who is actually a decent threat thanks to its move pool. I have Hephaestus Dynamax as well, allowing him to decently take a Max Rockfall. He then retaliates with a Max Quake, bringing Garbodor to about half HP after Sandstorm damage. Another Max Rockfall leaves Hephaestus with about a third, and his next Max Quake seemingly gets a low roll this time, just barely missing the KO I was hoping for after more Sandstorm damage. At the very least, he can then Max Guard on the final turn of Dynamax, then switch over to Surtur, who survives a strong Gunk Shot coming in, before finally finishing off with a final Thunderbolt. Sorry, Oleana, Rose is just not that into you. With that out of the way, we can continue with the tournament. But Bede decides now is the perfect time to lock in and force us to battle. Konohana starts by roasting his Mawile with a single Flamethrower, then a Sludge Bomb just barely doesn't KO his Gardevoir, which allows it to nail Konohana with a super effective Psychic, but she's holding a Focus Sash, allowing her to survive on 1 HP. After Bede heals with a full restore, another Sludge Bomb brings Gardevoir into the red, and poisons, which immediately brings her down. Rapidash is next, so I bring in Surtur to take a Quick Attack and Psycho Cut, before connecting with a Shadow Ball that brings it below half. I risk a crit by keeping him in, which is probably not a smart move, but it pays off. Surtur survives on 20 HP, and another Shadow Ball takes it down. Last is Bede's Gigantamax Hatterene, so I switch to Hestia, and for some reason Hatterene decides to go for a Max Flare, which ends up being blocked by Hestia's Flash Fire ability. I then have Hestia Dynamax on the next turn to let loose a Max Flutterby that deals a bit over half, while lowering Hatterene's special attack. This ends up reducing the damage of her Max Mindstorm, and just one more Max Flutterby is enough for another decisive victory against Bede. But now we have the rematch against Nessa, and despite having a stronger and more diverse team since the last time we faced her, water types are still our Achilles heel. I lead with Surtur against her Golisopod, who manages to just barely miss out on a one-hit KO with a super effective Thunderbolt, which ends up activating its emergency exit ability. She sends in her Barraskewda, her one Pokemon that can outspeed and hit hard, but I have Surtur holding the Choice Scarf, meaning he can take it down with one hit with another Thunderbolt. Golisopod comes back in, only to be healed with a full restore, then sent back again after another Thunderbolt fails to get another KO. So Seeking comes in this time, and somehow survives another Thunderbolt, only to waste its turn using Aqua Ring instead of something actually useful. So it naturally goes down the next turn, and Golisopod returns for the third time. The difference this time is that Nessa only had one full restore, so another Thunderbolt finally takes Golisopod down. Pelipper comes in and sets up Rain before going down easy, but the real problem is going to be Nessa's Gigantamax Dreadnought. I'm forced to bring in Hephaestus to overwrite the Rain with Sun, weakening his G-Max Stone Surge, which still manages to drop Hephaestus below half HP. And here's where I make a critical mistake. I should have stalled out a turn with Max Guard, but instead I switched to Helios to Intimidate, hoping that lowering its attack would help, except I forgot that G-Max Stone Surge sets up Stealth Rocks. They take off a fourth of his HP, and despite the attack drop, a Max Rockfall manages to take Helios down. Because of that blunder, I'm down one of my most powerful fire types, which could put us at a disadvantage later. But right now, I have to bring Hephaestus back in to restore the sun, then immediately pivot to Pele, who even after Stealth Rock damage can survive another G-Max Stone Surge much better than Helios did. After that, Dreadnought finally reverts to normal size, and after a weakened Liquidation, Rocky Helmet Chip, and a one-turn Solar Beam from Pele, Dreadnought finally goes down. With that, we have another tournament win against our toughest opponent yet, but at the cost of an integral member of the team. In contrast, the rematch against B ends up being a cakewalk. I start with Surtur still holding his Choice Scarf, allowing him to outspeed her Hawlucha and take it down with a single Thunderbolt. Her Phalanx can only miss a Rock Tomb before going down with a couple more Thunderbolts, then her Graplock is completely walled by Kojin, thanks to only knowing fighting and normal type moves. A couple Shadow Bones takes it out, and next comes Sirfetch'd. Unlike the others, Sirfetch'd can threaten Kojin thanks to Brutal Swing, but he just tanks it like a champ, even with it critting. I still have to switch her out for Apollo, but a second Brutal Swing doesn't end up doing much, allowing him to take it down with an Acrobatics. Last is B's Gigantamax Machamp, but his only coverage move is Fire Punch, meaning Hyperion can completely wall him thanks to his Flash Fire ability. I don't even need to Dynamax. All Hyperion needs to do is let loose some Heat Waves, which is made quicker thanks to Machamp's Max Flare boosting its power. B tries to delay the inevitable with a full restore, but Machamp goes down, giving us another tournament win. Last but not least is Raihan, this time as a single battle. So sadly, my awesome double battle strategy won't work this time around. Hyperion starts off with a Shadow Ball that brings his Torkoal into the red before it gets off at Yawn. I don't want to deal with Sleep this early in the fight, so I switch to Pele to tank a Lava Plume coming in. A Dragon Pulse takes Torkoal out on the next turn, then Flygon comes in next. I switch to Surtur as Flygon goes for a Sandstorm, which ends up reducing the power of his next couple of Shadow Balls. So after a couple Dragon Claws and Sandstorm damage put him in the red, I decide to pivot to Hephaestus to bring in the sun. Expecting Raihan to take a turn bringing back the Sandstorm, I take the opportunity to switch to Apollo, who can use U-turn on the next turn to get the kill, and bring Pele back in for free. Raihan then sends out his own Turtonator, who takes a huge chunk of damage from a Dragon Pulse before setting up the sun for us. Another Dragon Pulse takes our Doppelganger out, and next is Goodra. It goes for Rain Dance, giving us another free super effective Dragon Pulse, and after dodging a Muddy Water, another Dragon Pulse brings Goodra into the red. A Surf ends up doing some decent damage, but Pele hangs on to land one last Dragon Pulse to take it down. That leaves Raihan's Gigantamax Duraludon, but now we have a problem. None of my other Pokemon can come in safely since Duraludon knows Max Rockfall. So I make the decision to keep Pele in, but it ends up using G-Max Depletion. I didn't even consider that it would go for Pele's Dragon weakness. In hindsight, G-Max Depletion and Max Rockfall have the same base power, and when you include Stab, it's actually not a surprise that the AI did this. So because of that, I could have possibly had a more safe switch, but instead I'm down one of my more useful team members. At the very least, this gives us a free switch, so I send out Hephaestus to Dynamax. After taking a Max Rockfall, he lets loose a Max Quake that brings Duraludon below half, and at this point I could go for a Max Guard on its final Gigantamax turn, but I take a risk and go for another Max Quake. Another Max Rockfall connects, and Hephaestus survives with just 25 HP. Duraludon goes down, giving us the win and earning us the right to challenge Champion Leon. But before we could do that, Chairman Rose decides to finally lock in and kick off the Purple Apocalypse for some reason, so it's up to us to put a stop to it. But seeing as his team is full of Steel types, they obviously don't stand a chance against us. Konohana completely barbecues his Escavalier, Klinklang, Berserker, and Ferrothorn with a single flamethrower each. Then Surtur the Toaster Oven toasts his Gigantamax Copperaja with a couple Max Flares. And after we take down said Purple Apocalypse with the help of Grey Great Wolf Sif, and the other one, we can finally move on to the true final challenge of the run, Champion Leon. We lost some key team members along the way, but that doesn't mean we still don't have some tricks and heavy hitters up our sleeve. Let's see if we have enough firepower to take down the hardest fight in the game and end the run strong. The key to this fight is taking out his Aegislash as quickly as possible, so I leave with Hyperion, who after his first attack is blocked with King Shield, can let loose a super effective flamethrower the next turn to take it out in a single hit. Next is Haxorus, whose Mold Breaker ability means that no one on my team is safe from Earthquake. So I have to keep Hyperion in and hope he survives to connect with an inaccurate Will-O-Wisp, and he does. However, even with the attack drop from the burn, I'm still not confident that anyone on the team can take a hit and outspeed the take Haxorus down the following turn, so I make the reluctant decision to keep Hyperion in. He goes down to another Earthquake on the next turn, but this gives Konohana the opportunity to come in for free to finish Haxorus with the Dragon Pulse. Inteleon is next, and I once again am forced to make the sacrifice play. Super effective and high crit chance Snipe Shot, and even a Mud Shot would be lethal to the entire team, so I keep Konohana in to bring it below half with the Dragon Pulse, and then a quad effective Mud Shot connects and takes her out as well. Technically, we're winning 2 for 3 against Leon so far, but the fight is not over. I bring in Apollo next, who manages to outspeed and take Inteleon down with a U-turn. I then bring Hestia in against Dragapult, who normally is a massive threat, but I have Hestia holding an Assault Vest, meaning even a couple Shadow Balls can't bring her below half. A couple crunches later, and Dragapult goes down. A Leech Life then takes out Mr. Rhyme in a single hit, and completely heals Hestia back to full HP, putting us in a fairly decent position as Leon's Gigantamax Charizard takes the field. And I really hate having to keep doing this, but I feel like I have to keep Hestia in. Charizard goes for a quad effective Max Rockfall, and Hestia actually survives. Her Assault Vest is definitely putting in the work. A Thunderfang only does about a third, but that's okay. I switch to Hephaestus, who also manages to survive a Max Rockfall, and after Dynamaxing and guarding Charizard's final Gigantamax turn, I make one more on-brand risky move by keeping him in on just a fourth of his HP left. He just needs to survive one last Ancient Power in order to fire off his own Max Rockfall, and he does. With just 18 HP left, Hephaestus takes Charizard down, and Champion Leon is defeated. Our hardcore Nuzlocke run using only Fire-type Pokémon ends in victory. It kinda sucks that I needed some last-minute sacrifices to get through, but in the end, a win is a win. Learning how to bypass the Fire-type's common weaknesses was pretty fun and rewarding, which is a big reason why I enjoy doing Mono-type runs. So if you enjoyed this run, please don't hesitate to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any suggestions on what kind of challenges you'd like to see in the future, please feel free to drop a comment below. Some of you have left a few suggestions that have intrigued me, so please keep them coming. And with that, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.